The gavel slammed like a gunshot, but it was Judge Harlan Tate's voice that drew blood. "You people always think you can lie your way out," he sneered, his eyes boring into Nia Carter, who stood rigid at the defendant's table, her heart pounding like a war drum. Nia's hands gripped the edge of the table, her knuckles paling under her dark skin as she fought to keep her composure. The courtroom, a sterile box of polished wood and flickering fluorescent lights, felt like a cage. She wasn't just on trial for a minor theft she didn't commit, she was on trial for existing. For being black in a town where justice wore a blindfold only when it suited men like Tate. The judge's words hung in the air, venomous and deliberate, slicing through the murmurs of the sparse audience. Her public defender, a nervous young man named Eli, fumbled with his papers, too green to challenge the titan in black robes. Nia's life hadn't been easy, but it had never felt this small. At 32, she was a single mother, a nurse's aide who worked double shifts to keep her son, Jamal, in school and out of trouble. The accusation a stolen necklace from the hospital where she worked was flimsy, built on the word of a bitter coworker and a security camera that showed nothing but grainy shadows. Yet here she was, facing a man who'd already decided her guilt before the trial began. "Do you have anything to say for yourself, Miss Carter?" Tate's voice dripped with condescension, his thin lips curling as if her name tasted sour. Nia straightened, her voice steady despite the fire in her chest. "I didn't steal anything, Your Honor. I've worked hard my whole life. I'm not a thief." The judge chuckled, a low, ugly sound. "Hard work? That's rich. People like you don't get where you are by hard work." He leaned forward, his jowls trembling with smug authority. "You think you can fool this court?" The room went silent, the air thick with shock. Even Eli froze, his pen hovering over his notepad. Nia's breath caught, not from fear but from the sheer audacity of the man. She'd faced prejudice before, whispers in the hospital break room, suspicious glances in stores, but this was different. This was a judge, the embodiment of justice, spitting hatred from the bench. Before she could respond, a voice cut through the tension like a blade. "Objection!" It was Lila Monroe, a seasoned attorney who'd been sitting quietly in the back, observing the trial for reasons no one yet understood. Lila was a legend in civil rights law, her sharp suits and sharper mind a fixture in courtrooms across the state. Her dark hair was pulled back tightly, her eyes blazing with purpose as she stood. "Your Honor, your comments are grossly inappropriate and prejudicial. I demand a mistrial." Tate's face reddened, his gavel twitching in his hand. "You have no standing here, Ms. Monroe. This is my courtroom." "Not for long." Lila shot back, her voice calm but razor-sharp. She stepped forward, holding a manila folder that seemed to pulse with secrets. "I've been watching you, Judge Tate, and I'm not the only one." The courtroom stirred, heads turning, whispers rising like a tide. Nia's heart raced. She didn't know Lila, had never met her, but the woman's presence was like a lifeline thrown into a storm. Tate slammed his gavel again, his voice booming. "Order! You will not disrupt these proceedings." But Lila didn't flinch. She opened the folder, pulling out a stack of documents. "These are sworn affidavits from court staff, witnesses, and defendants spanning 3 years. They detail a pattern of racial bias, coercion, and outright corruption in your rulings, Judge Tate. You've targeted black and brown defendants, pressured plea deals, and taken bribes to sway verdicts." The room erupted. Spectators gasped, Eli's jaw dropped, and even the bailiff shifted uneasily. Nia's eyes widened, her mind struggling to process the turn of events. Tate's smug facade cracked, his hands trembling as he pointed at Lila. "This is outrageous. You're slandering an officer of the court." "Slander?" Lila's smile was cold, lethal. I have evidence, Your Honor. Bank records, emails, recorded conversations. Would you like me to read them aloud? Tate's face went from red to ashen. He opened his mouth, but no words came. The courtroom doors swung open, and 2 police officers stepped inside, their faces grim. The lead officer, a tall man with a no-nonsense demeanor, held up a pair of handcuffs. Judge Harlan Tate, you're under arrest for judicial misconduct, bribery, and violation of federal civil rights laws. The room exploded into chaos. Spectators shouted, reporters scribbled furiously, and Tate's gavel fell from his hand, clattering onto the bench. Nia stood frozen, her heart pounding as the officers approached the bench. Tate sputtered, his voice shrill. This is absurd. You can't arrest me. I'm a judge. Not anymore, Lila said, her voice steady as steel. As the officers cuffed Tate, his eyes darted to Nia, wild with rage and something else, fear. For the first time, Nia felt the weight of the room shift. She wasn't just a defendant anymore. She was a witness to justice, raw and unyielding. The trial was halted, the charges against Nia dismissed pending review. But the story didn't end there. As Tate was led away, his shouts echoing down the hall, Lila approached Nia, her expression softening. I'm sorry you had to go through this, she said. But this fight's bigger than one courtroom. Will you help me? Nia hesitated, her mind racing. She thought of Jamal, of the world he'd grow up in, of the countless others who'd faced Tate's gavel and lost. She nodded. What do I need to do? Lila's eyes gleamed with determination. Tell your story. All of it. The days that followed were a whirlwind. Nia's case became a flashpoint, a spark that ignited protests and headlines across the country. Tate's arrest wasn't just a local scandal, it was a reckoning. News outlets dug into his record, uncovering decades of biased rulings, backroom deals, and a network of corruption that stretched far beyond the small town of Ellswood. Nia, once a quiet nurse's aide, found herself at the center of it all. She was no activist, no hero, just a woman who'd wanted to clear her name. But Lila saw something more in her, a voice that could carry. Together, they worked with a coalition of lawyers, activists, and journalists to expose not just Tate but the system that had propped him up. Nia's first step was an interview with a national news outlet. Sitting under the bright lights of a studio, she felt exposed, vulnerable. But as the cameras rolled, she thought of Jamal, of the mothers who'd sat in that courtroom before her, of the weight of silence. I didn't just want justice for me, she said, her voice steady despite the nerves. I want it for everyone who's been told they don't matter. The interview went viral. Hashtags like Justice for Nia and End Court Corruption trended for weeks. Protesters gathered outside courthouses, demanding reform. Tate's case, meanwhile, unraveled in real time. The evidence Lila had presented was just the tip of the iceberg. Bank records showed payments from private prison companies. Emails revealed threats to defendants who refused plea deals, and former clerks testified to Tate's explicit bias against non-white defendants. But the fight wasn't easy. Nia faced backlash, anonymous threats, hateful messages, even a brick thrown through her apartment window. Jamal, only 12, saw the toll it took on his mother. One night, as they sat at their small kitchen table, he asked, Mom, why don't you stop? You're free now. Isn't that enough? Nia's throat tightened. She wanted to protect him, to keep him safe from the ugliness of the world. But she couldn't lie. It's not just about me, baby, she said, taking his hand. If I stop, who's gonna make sure this doesn't happen to someone else? To you. Jamal nodded, his young face hardening with a resolve that broke Nia's heart and made her proud all at once. Then I'm with you, he said. Lila's coalition grew, but so did the resistance. Tate's allies, powerful men in suits who'd benefited from his rulings, fought back, smearing Lila and Nia in the press, questioning their motives, their credibility. A rival judge, sympathetic to Tate, tried to block the release of key evidence, claiming it was tainted. The battle wasn't just in the courtroom now. It was in the streets, the newsrooms, the hearts of a divided town. Nia began speaking at rallies, her voice growing stronger with each one. She wasn't polished, but she was real. People listened not just to her story, but to the stories of others who came forward. A Latino man who'd been coerced into a plea deal, a Native woman whose case had been dismissed with a sneer, a Black teenager who'd spent months in jail for a crime he didn't commit. Each story chipped away at the myth of impartial justice, revealing a system rotten at its core. One evening, as Nia prepared for a community forum, Lila pulled her aside. "There's something you need to know," she said, her voice low. "We've got evidence that Tate wasn't acting alone. There's a network, judges, prosecutors, even police. We're close to exposing them, but it's dangerous. Are you ready for what comes next?" Nia's stomach churned. She thought of the brick, the threats, the weight of it all. But she thought of Jamal, too, and the world she wanted for him. "I'm ready," she said. The forum was packed, the air electric with anticipation. Nia took the stage, her hands shaking but her voice clear. "This isn't just about one judge," she said, the crowd hanging on her every word. "It's about a system that lets men like him thrive. It's about us, black, brown, poor, forgotten, saying no more." The crowd roared, a wave of defiance that shook the room. But as Nia spoke, a man in the back slipped out, his phone already pressed to his ear. The man's exit didn't go unnoticed. Lila's eyes tracked him from the stage, her instincts sharp as ever. She leaned toward Nia, whispering, "We need to move. Now." Nia's pulse quickened, but she nodded, her resolve unshaken. The forum ended in a blur of applause and shouted questions from the crowd, but Lila ushered Nia and Jamal out a side door, where a car waited. Inside, a young lawyer from Lila's team, Marcus, handed them a burner phone. "No calls on your personal devices," he said. "They're watching." "Who's they?" Nia asked, her voice tight as she buckled Jamal into the back seat. Lila's jaw clenched. "Tate's network. Judges, prosecutors, local businessmen with stakes in private prisons. They're circling the wagons, and you're their biggest threat." Jamal's eyes widened, but he stayed silent, clutching his mother's hand. Nia's mind raced. She'd known this fight was bigger than her, but the reality of being hunted for telling the truth hit like a punch. Still, she straightened, her voice firm. "What's the plan?" Lila's lips curved into a grim smile. "We go public, hard and fast. Tomorrow we're filing a federal lawsuit against Tate and his cronies. Your story, Nia, is the heart of it. But we need more witnesses, people who'll back up what you've seen." The next morning, Nia sat in a cramped office with Lila's team, poring over documents and witness statements. The evidence was damning. Wire transfers linking Tate to a private prison company, emails pressuring prosecutors to target minority defendants, even a recorded call where Tate bragged about keeping the riffraff in line. But the network was vast, and exposing it meant risking everything. Nia's role was to rally the community. She wasn't a lawyer or an activist, but she was a mother, a worker, a survivor, and people trusted her. Lila coached her for a press conference that afternoon, one that would air live across major networks. "Speak from the heart," Lila said. "That's your power." As Nia stepped onto the steps of the county courthouse, cameras flashing and microphones thrust toward her, she felt the weight of 1,000 eyes. The crowd was a mix of supporters waving signs, "Justice for Nia," and detractors, their faces twisted with anger, shouting slurs from the sidelines. Jamal stood beside her, his small hand in hers, giving her strength. "I'm no hero," Nia began, her voice cutting through the noise. "I'm just a woman who wanted a fair shot. But Judge Tate didn't see me. He saw my skin and decided my guilt. He's not Alanethra's a system behind him, one that's been breaking people like me for years. Today we're saying enough." The crowd roared, but the detractors grew louder, their shouts laced with hate. A bottle sailed through the air, shattering on the steps. Security moved in, but Nia didn't flinch. "I'm here for my son," she said, her voice rising. "For your sons and daughters. For every person who's been told they don't belong. We're not invisible anymore." The press conference was a turning point. Social media exploded, with Justice for Nia trending globally. More witnesses came forward: janitors who'd overheard Tate's rants, defendants who'd been coerced, even a retired clerk who'd kept meticulous notes on his rulings. Lila's team worked around the clock, building a case that couldn't be ignored. But the backlash was fierce. Tate's allies launched a smear campaign, painting Nia as a liar and Lila as an opportunist. Local businesses, tied to the private prison network, pulled funding from community programs, and Nia's landlord suddenly demanded she vacate her apartment. The threats escalated: a slashed tire, a dead rat left on her doorstep. Each one was a message. Back off. Nia didn't. She couldn't. Every time she wavered, she thought of Jamal's question. "Who's gonna make sure this doesn't happen to someone else?" She spoke at more rallies, met with more victims, and worked with Lila to organize a march on the state capitol. The movement was growing, but so was the danger. One night, as Nia tucked Jamal into bed, he whispered, "Mom, are we gonna be okay?" Her heart ached, but she forced a smile. "We're gonna be more than okay, baby. We're gonna make things right." The march was set for a crisp Saturday morning. Thousands gathered: black, white, Latino, native, young, old, carrying signs and chanting for justice. Nia walked at the front, Jamal at her side, Lila on her other flank. The energy was electric, a tide of hope and fury. But as they neared the Capitol, a line of counter-protesters blocked their path, their faces masked, their signs vicious. "Go back to where you came from," one screamed, his voice raw with hate. Nia's stomach twisted, but she kept walking, her chin high. The police stood by, their expressions unreadable, and for a moment, it felt like the world might crack open. Then, a young woman from the crowd, a white college student with a megaphone, stepped forward. "We're with you, Nia," she shouted, and the marchers erupted, their voices drowning out the hate. The confrontation made headlines, but it also drew the Fed's attention. The Department of Justice launched an investigation into Tate's network, and Lila's lawsuit gained traction. By the following week, 3 more judges and 2 prosecutors were indicted. Their names splashed across every news outlet. Tate's trial was fast-tracked, and Nia was called as a key witness. The courtroom was different this time: Eno Tate on the bench. No sneers from the judge's seat. The new judge, a stern but fair woman named Alvarez, ran a tight ship. Nia took the stand, her voice steady as she recounted Tate's words, his bias, the way he'd made her feel like less than human. The room was silent, every word landing like a stone. When the prosecution played the recorded call, Tate's voice boasting about teaching them a lesson, the jury's faces hardened. Tate, sitting at the defendant's table, looked small, deflated, his arrogance gone. Nia met his eyes, not with anger but with something fiercer: truth. The trial lasted weeks, each day peeling back another layer of corruption. Witnesses testified to Tate's bribes, his threats, his glee in wielding power. Lila's team was relentless, their evidence airtight. When the verdict came guilty on all counts, the courtroom erupted in cheers. Tate was sentenced to 15 years, his judicial career in ashes. But the victory wasn't just Nia's. The DOJ's investigation expanded, targeting the private prison companies that had fueled the corruption. New laws were proposed to curb judicial misconduct, and Ellswood's courthouse underwent a top-down review. Nia's case, once a footnote, became a symbol of change. She didn't stop there. With Lila's help, Nia started a nonprofit to support wrongfully accused defendants, offering legal aid and community resources. She spoke at schools, sharing her story with kids like Jamal, showing them they could fight back. Her apartment was safe again, thanks to donations from supporters, and Jamal started smiling more, his pride in his mother palpable. One evening, as Nia and Jamal sat on their new porch, watching the sunset, he asked, "Mom, did we win?" Nia thought of the threats, the hate, the nights she'd cried herself to sleep. But she also thought of the marchers, the witnesses, the families who'd found their voices. "We're winning," she said, pulling him close. "And we're not done yet." The fight for justice wasn't over, it never would be. But Nia had learned something profound. One voice, raised in truth, could shake a system to its core. She'd started as a defendant, a nobody in a small town. Now, she was a force, a mother, a beacon for those still in the dark. What do you think? Where does justice begin? And who gets to decide what's right? Share your thoughts, because this story belongs to all of us.